I want to be clear about one thing before I start. I was not supposed to be at Malpais crossing that afternoon. My orders had me 40 miles south, watching a water crossing on the Silo Road for sign of the Harket Operations supply rider. I had been at that crossing for 2 days and seen nothing but lizards and a coyote that had no opinion about the law. When word came through a Navajo trader that something was happening up at the old relay station, something involving a woman traveling alone and the Harket men who had taken it over as a waypoint, I made a decision about my orders and rode north. My name is Orrin Briggs. I was a deputy marshal out of the Tierra Amarilla district in 1874, which is a title that sounds more impressive than it was in practice. The district was large and the law was thin, and most days the job was less about enforcing anything and more about being visible enough that certain kinds of men took their business elsewhere. I had been doing it for 11 years by that point, and I had developed a reasonable sense of when a situation was going to resolve itself, and when it needed somebody to ride toward it. Malpais Crossing needed somebody. What I found when I got there, approaching from the East Arroyo so as not to announce myself, was a relay station that had been sitting on the Silo Road since the freight days, and that the Harket operation had been using as a waypoint for 8 months. 4 men visible from the outside, 2 by the corral, 1 on the porch, 1 I could not account for. 5 horses in the corral, none of them belonging to a woman traveling alone from Missouri, which told me her horse had been taken or she had come by stage, and the eastbound had run 3 days ago, which meant she had been there at least since Tuesday. What I also found, arriving quietly on the East Ridge and settling in with my field glass, was Dex Calloway's horse tied to the hitching post out front. I knew that horse, a gray Andalusian cross with a brand from the Ray's operation in the Panhandle, which is where Dex had acquired him 3 years prior. Dex had ridden that horse on 4 operations I knew about, and probably more I didn't, because Dex Calloway was a Texas Ranger who operated with a discretion that meant you knew about his cases approximately 2 months after they were finished and not before. I had worked with Dex twice. I had not always enjoyed it, because Dex's approach to a dangerous situation was to get quieter, which is not everyone's instinct, and quieter men are harder to read in the moment when you need to know what they are about to do. What I had learned from those 2 operations was that Dex Calloway's quiet was not uncertainty. It was calculation, the kind that runs fast and deep and arrives at an answer before the other man knows the question has been asked. He was already inside. He had already been inside long enough for his horse to be at the post and not in the corral, which meant he had presented himself as a passing stranger who might be moving on shortly, and had been allowed to come in and water his horse from the trough. I put my field glass away and stayed on the ridge and watched and waited, because the worst thing I could do for whatever Dex was managing in there was ride in and change the calculation. I am going to tell you what happened inside from what Dex told me afterward and from what I observed, because I was not in the room and I am not going to pretend I was. What was inside? The main room of the relay station, which had been a way stop for freight wagons and which still had the long table and the bench seating of a public house. 3 of the 4 Harket men, the 4th was in the barn. The man running the room was a man named Creel, who was not the Harket operations principal, but was its most dangerous daily problem, because Creel was intelligent and patient in the way of a man who has spent a long time doing something that requires both qualities. He was 35, and he had been working the territory's outlaw economy for 8 years, and he had survived it by being careful about what he decided. He was deciding about Delia Marsh. She was sitting at the far end of the long table with a carpet bag beside her on the bench, and her hands folded on the table in front of her. This is how Dex described her, sitting with her hands folded, her back straight, and her eyes moving through the room at regular intervals in the precise pattern of a woman who has assessed her situation completely and is now monitoring it for changes. She had, he said, the quality of a person who has decided to be neither afraid nor foolish about a thing, and has settled on careful instead, and is executing careful with considerable discipline. He had clocked her in the first 4 seconds. He had clocked Creel in the next 4. He had clocked the 2 men against the wall and the table's geography, and the door to the barn, and the window on the south side, and the lamp bracket and the distance from where he was standing to where she was sitting. All of this had happened before he said a word to anyone, which is the kind of thing Dex Calloway did, and which you understand better in retrospect than in the moment. He had introduced himself as a horse trader named Calloway out of Albuquerque, heading south with a string of 4 horses for a buyer in Las Cruces, had stopped to water his horse and wondered if the station was selling provisions. Creel had told him the station wasn't set up for provisions anymore, but he was welcome to rest his horse and have a drink. Dex had said he appreciated that and come inside. This was the situation when I arrived on the ridge. Dex at the near end of the table with a cup of water, Creel in the middle, and Delia Marsh at the far end, and the 2 Harkett men against the wall watching the room with the incurious attention of men waiting for an instruction. What Dex told me he understood in the first 10 minutes, Creel was not going to do anything rash. He was a careful man. The problem with careful men in that situation is not that they make a move too soon, it's that they take their time arriving at a conclusion, and once they arrive at it, they act on it with efficiency and without second-guessing. The conclusion Creel was working toward, in Dex's assessment, was whether Delia Marsh knew anything useful and, if not, whether releasing her created a problem. She had come through on the eastbound stage 3 days ago, heading for a land claim at Silo Flats. The Harkett operation had a route that ran through the Silo Flats area. The question in Creel's mind was whether she had seen or heard anything on the road that was worth knowing, and if the answer was no, whether a woman who had seen the inside of a Harkett waypoint was going to be a problem when she reached a town with a telegraph. Dex had, he said, maybe 40 minutes before Creel finished the calculation. He worked the time. He talked horses. Creel had a passing interest in horses, and the conversation was easy and real, the kind that happens between men who both know something about a subject and are establishing that they know it. He let the conversation drift toward the territory, the roads, what he'd seen on the ride from Albuquerque. He asked about the road south, whether the Silo Flats crossing was passable this time of year. He asked it as a man asking for practical information, not as a man fishing for anything. During this conversation, he looked at Delia Marsh once. Just once. A glance, the kind a man gives a woman in a room when he is accounting for the room, not significant, not held. She was looking at him when he did it. He saw her see him look, and he saw her understand something in the quality of it, and he saw her decide to say and do nothing, which is the correct response from someone who understands the situation and has the discipline to hold her position. She had, he said, understood immediately. He went back to the conversation with Creel. The thing that happened, the thing that opened the door, was not dramatic. It was a horse. One of the 4 horses in the corral was not right. Dex had seen it from outside. The animal was favoring its left rear, the way a horse favors a hoof that has something working into it. He had noted it and filed it. Creel had mentioned, somewhere in the conversation about horses, that they had lost a man to a lame horse 2 weeks ago on the Jornada Road, which told Dex that Creel had enough concern about horses to respond to someone who knew what they were looking at. At the 32-minute mark, Dex said, "You've got a horse in that corral with something in its left rear hoof. If you want, I can pull it before it founders. I carry the tools." Creel looked at him. Creel looked at the man nearest the barn door. The man near the barn door went out to check. He came back and said yes, the roan had something in its hoof. Creel said that would be appreciated if Calloway didn't mind. Dex said he didn't mind and went to his horse for the tools, and while he was there, outside, at the hitching post, with his back to the station door, he made 2 decisions. He pulled the hoof tools from his saddlebag. He also placed his badge in his vest pocket where it would be visible to anyone standing at his left side at close range. He went to the corral. The man from the barn came with him. Creel stayed inside. This left Creel and one man in the main room with Delia Marsh, and Dex working the roans hoof 12 feet from the corral fence with the barn man watching, and the two men from the porch drifting toward the corral because men drift toward things that are happening in a quiet afternoon. At the fence, with his back to the station, Dex said to the barn man, quietly, conversationally, as though continuing the horse conversation, "I need you to hear me without changing your face." The barn man heard him. Dex said, "I'm a ranger. There's a deputy marshal on the ridge east of here who has had this station under glass for an hour. In about 4 minutes I'm going to go back inside and collect the woman and walk out, and that transaction is going to go one of two ways. The easy way is nobody moves. The other way costs you something you don't want to spend. I am telling you this because you look like a man who does the math." The barn man did the math. He said nothing. He watched the horse. Dex pulled a small stone from the roan's hoof. There was one, as he had known there would be, and packed it and stood up, and walked back across the yard and into the station. I watched it from the ridge. I will tell you what it looked like from outside. A horse trader walked back into a relay station, and approximately 90 seconds later he walked back out with a woman carrying a carpet bag, and they went to the hitching post, and he helped her onto the gray Andalusian, and he untied his horse, and they walked south on the Silo Road, and nobody came out of the station after them. What happened inside in those 90 seconds, from what Dex told me? He came back in. He set the hoof tools on the table. He said to Creel in the same conversational tone he had used for the entire visit, "I looked at your other horses while I was out there. They're road sound. You've got good stock." He picked up his hat from where he had set it. He said, "I'm going to take this woman south to Silo Flats. She has a land claim there and she's 3 days behind her schedule and the road is better in daylight." He looked at Creel. "She's with me." This is not a thing that is said to a man like Creel in a room he controls. It is the kind of statement that requires a specific quality in the person making it. The quality of a man who is not announcing a wish, but informing a room of a fact that has already been determined. Creel had been doing what he did for 8 years by reading men, and he read Dex Calloway in that moment. And what he read was a man who had done the math before he spoke, and who was giving Creel the courtesy of knowing the answer before he made any moves that would be expensive. He also, Dex said, glanced at his barn man who had come back inside. The barn man looked at the floor. Creel said nothing. He picked up his cup. Dex picked up Delia Marsh's carpet bag. He said to her, "Ready?" She said yes. They walked out. I came down from the ridge when they were clear of the station by a 1/4 mile, and I fell in alongside them on the Silo Road, and Dex looked at me with the expression of a man who is not surprised, but has something to say about it. I said, "I was already on the ridge when you went in." He said, "I know, I saw your glass." I said, "You knew I was there." He said, "I figured you'd stay put." I had stayed put. I told him so. He said, "Good." We rode in silence for a while. The woman was on the gray Andalusian. She had her carpet bag across her lap, and she was riding with the posture of a woman who knows how to ride, but is tired in the specific way of a person who has been holding their composure tightly for 3 days, and is now doing the calculation of when it is safe to stop. After about a mile she said, to both of us, or to no one in particular, "How long were you on the ridge?" I said, "About an hour." She said, "I saw you leave the station yard when the horse went lame. I thought you might be doing something with that." I looked at Dex. He said nothing. She said, "I didn't know what, but I knew it was something. So I stayed quiet." Dex said, "You did right." She said, "I know." Not in the way of a woman who is correcting someone, but in the flat, certain way of a woman who has known it since she made the decision. We rode for another hour before I turned back north. My business was still 40 miles south at the water crossing, and the Harkett operation didn't stop because one of its waypoints had been cleared. I told Dex I would file the report on Malpais crossing. He said he would appreciate that. I said he was welcome. I looked at Delia Marsh. She had rearranged the carpetbag and was watching the road south with the expression of a woman who has put the last 3 days somewhere manageable and is now thinking about what comes next. I said, "Ma'am, your land claim at Silo Flats, do you know the condition of it?" She said, "I know what my husband's letter described 3 years ago. That's all I know." I said, "It's good country. The Silo water comes up in spring." She said, "I'll have to see it." I said, "You will." I tipped my hat. I turned north. I looked back once from a quarter-mile out. They were riding south together on the Silo road in the late afternoon light, about 6 feet of road between them, and neither of them was talking. That was all I saw. I am going to tell you about the 2 days on the Silo road from what Dex told me, because I was not there, and I will not pretend to be. He is not a man who talks about himself in the ordinary way of things, and what he told me 4 months later when we were both in Tierra Amarilla for a court matter, sitting outside the courthouse in the October sun, and I asked him directly how the Silo Flats business had resolved. He told me what I am about to tell you. In the plain-spoken way, he told everything. The first night they made camp 6 miles south of Malpais crossing, at a spring that Dex knew from a previous ride through the territory. He built the fire and she made the coffee, which she did without asking whether he wanted her to, because the coffee situation was evident, and she was practical about evident situations. They ate from what he had in his saddlebag, jerked beef and hardtack, the standard, sufficient, unglamorous provisions of a man traveling alone, and she ate without commenting on the quality, which Dex noted, because some people comment on the quality. After they ate, she said, "I have a question." He said she could ask it. She said, "You told that man I was with you. I want to know if that was a tactical statement or a statement of intention." Dex looked at the fire for a moment. He said, "It was a tactical statement that I found I meant." She considered that. She said, "All right." She finished her coffee. She said, "I want you to know that I am going to Silo Flats to work a land claim, not to find a situation. I say that so you understand what I am and am not looking for on this road." He said he understood. She said, "Good. I am also going to tell you that I am not unaware that you walked into that station and did what you did, and I do not take that lightly, and I will not pretend it was nothing just because I'm also telling you I'm not looking for a situation." He said he appreciated that. She said, "You're a ranger." He said he was. She said, "Were you there for me or for the operation?" He said, "Both, the operation first, then you became the reason the timing mattered." She nodded. She said, "Honest answer." He said it was the only kind he had. They sat by the fire for a while longer. He told me she asked about the territory, practical questions, the kind of woman who is about to run a land operation alone asks. Water access, the nearest trading post, the condition of the Silo road in winter, whether the grazing in the area was contested. He answered all of it from what he knew, and what he didn't know he said he didn't know. She had, he said, a piece of paper, her husband's letter from 3 years back, and she cross-referenced what he said against it quietly to see where they matched and where they didn't. He said she did all of this the way she did everything he had observed her do, with precision and without fuss. He said he had not had a conversation that useful since his wife died. He said it flat, without apparent intention, the way a man says something that has been in his chest for a while and comes out sideways when he is not watching the door. I understood that, because that is how those things come out. She had asked him about his wife. He had told her the short version, which was that her name was Clara, that she had died of a fever 2 years prior, that they had had 4 good years, and he had not found anything since to match them. Delia had said she was sorry. He had said he knew she meant it. She had said something then. He told me what she said, but I am going to keep it, because it was the thing she said that was hers and not mine to repeat. What I will tell you is that he said it was the most accurate thing anyone had said to him in 2 years, and that it cost her something to say it, and that he knew that, and that it was the moment on the Silo road when he understood she was not simply a woman he had removed from a dangerous situation. They banked the fire and he took the first watch and she slept, and in the morning they made coffee from the same pot without discussing the division of labor, because they had already sorted it without needing to. The second day on the Silo road was a longer day, 14 miles to the Silo Flats turnoff, and another 4 down the branch road to the claim. Dex had not intended to ride all the way in. His plan, such as it was, had been to put her on the right road and turn back north, because he had a report to file, and the Harkett operation was not finished, and he had a ranger's obligations that did not pause for the road. He rode all the way in. He told me he decided it somewhere around the 12-mile mark, which is where the road crested a low ridge, and you could see the Silo Flats country spread out below, good grassland, the cottonwoods along the Silo Creek marking the water, the claim's original house still standing at the creek bend, small from the ridge but plainly there. He saw her see it. She had stopped her horse at the crest of the ridge and looked at it for a long time without speaking. He said the look on her face was the look of a woman who has been carrying a plan for 3 years and is now looking at the reality of it and doing the calculation of whether the plan and the reality are going to match. It was not a look of doubt. She was not a woman who had doubt in the ordinary sense. It was the look of adjustment. The plan is real. The land is real. Now find the delta between what I expected and what is here and account for it. He said it was the look of a capable person encountering a real problem, and that he had missed seeing that kind of person. They rode down to the claim. The house at the creek bend was a 3-room adobe that had been standing since the freighting days, and which had the particular solidity of buildings made from the right material in the right climate. It needed work. The roof on the north room had lost 2 vigas and let water in, and the well casing had cracked and would need relining, and the corral fence was down in 2 places. But the structure was sound, and the creek ran clear, and the grassland around it was what the letter had said it was. Good grazing, enough acreage for a modest cattle operation if you ran it carefully. Delia walked through each room and said nothing while she did it, which was how she processed things. She looked first and spoke after. When she came out she said, "It's workable." Dex said it was. She said, "The roof is the first problem." He said the roof was fixable, and he asked if she had any tools in the carpet bag, and she did a small collection of basic implements that she had packed specifically for the arrival, which told him she had thought about this. He said he had a hatchet and a folding saw in his saddlebag. She said that would help. He stayed the week. He has never explained this to me in so many words. When I asked him about it, he said the roof needed 2 people, and she was going to need to know where the water table was, and he knew how to read that country. Both of these things were true. They were also, he said, the reasons he gave himself for staying, which are not entirely the same as the reasons a person stays. I did not press it. What I know about the week at Silo Flats, the north room roof was repaired. The well casing was assessed. It needed a mason, which would have to come from Tierra Amarilla, and Dex wrote the letter she would need to send to arrange it. The corral fence was rerun. He showed her where the spring came up on the east side of the claim, which was not in the letter, because it came up in spring and her husband's letter had been written in summer. She planted that information the way she planted everything, precisely, in a specific location in her mind for later use. They talked in the evenings, not the way people talk when they are trying to impress each other. Neither of them was trying to impress. The way people talk when they are sitting by a fire in a quiet place, and both have things worth saying and have found someone worth saying them to. He told her about the ranger service, what it actually was, not the version of it that traveled, which was more dramatic and less true. She told him about Missouri, about the 3 years since her husband's letter, about the work she had done in that time and the decision she had made to come south, and the way she described the decision told him it was not an impulsive one and had not been made from desperation but from assessment. This is the best available option, and I am the right person to execute it. He believed her. On the 6th night she asked him how long he could stay. He said he needed to ride north in the morning. She said she understood. She said, "You've done more than you needed to. I want you to know I see that." He said he had done what needed doing. She said, "You always say that." He said, "It's generally true." She looked at him across the fire. She said, "Come back when you can." He said he would. She said, "I'm not asking you to promise anything. I'm asking you to come back when you can and mean it." He said he meant it. He rode north in the morning. I did not see him for 2 months. In that time I filed the report on Malpais Crossing, which led to a coordinated action that cleared the Harkett Operations Territory Network and removed Creel from the equation through the mechanism of a territorial court, which is the mechanism I prefer to the other kind. The barn man at Malpais Crossing was cooperative, which I mention not because it is surprising, but because Dex had read him correctly, which I also mention not because it is surprising. What I know about those 2 months from Dex, he came back to Silo Flats twice. The first time was 3 weeks after he left, when the court business had him in the territory anyway and the Silo Road was the right route south. He stayed 2 days. The mason had come from Tierra Amarilla and the well was lined. She had acquired a small herd, 8 cattle, 3 of them calves from a rancher at the flats who had a surplus. The corral was full. She had, he said, moved with considerable efficiency. The second time was 6 weeks after the first, when he had no particular business on the Silo Road and came anyway. He stayed 4 days. I know what was decided on those 4 days because of what I observed when he came back to Tierra Amarilla in October, which was this. He was a man who had put something down that he had been carrying for 2 years. I do not mean he had stopped grieving Clara, because that is not how it works and I am old enough to know it. I mean he had set down the particular weight of a man who has decided he has already had the best of things and is now just managing what's left. That weight was gone. He did not look happy in the easy sense. He looked like a man who has found a hard thing and found it worth the finding. I asked him how the Silo Flats business had resolved. He said, "She's running the claim, the water's up, the herd's at 12 head. I said, "And?" He looked at me with the expression of a man who is not going to say a thing he doesn't need to say because the other man already knows it. I said, "All right." He said, "I'm putting in for a transfer to the New Mexico district." I said, "I know." He said, "I told her." I said, "What did she say?" He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "She said the north room could use a desk if I was going to be doing paperwork." I looked at him. He was looking at the road south. I said, "That sounds like her." He said, "It does. I have been a deputy marshal for 23 years, and I have seen the frontier do a great many things to a great many people. It strips most of them of something, patience or hope, or the belief that the world has any particular order to it. The ones who make it through are the ones who have enough of something real to hold on to when the stripping starts." What I observed at Malpais Crossing and on the Silo Road in the autumn of 1874 was 2 people who had both been stripped of something, him of Clara, her of 3 years of waiting and traveling alone toward a piece of land in a territory she had never seen, and who had what was left of them after the stripping was done. It turned out what was left was considerable, in both cases. It turned out what was left was enough. He rode south in October. I watched him go. He had his saddlebag and his field tools and the Andalusian and a ranger's badge that was now pinned to his vest instead of tucked in a pocket, because a man who is going somewhere he intends to stay does not conceal what he is. The north room at Silo Flats has a desk in it now. I know this because I have been there twice, for court business that took me south, and both times the desk was there with papers on it and a lamp and a coffee cup, and Delia Marsh Calloway was in the next room running her accounts, and Dex was somewhere on the claim doing the thing that needed doing next. The first time I visited, she made coffee without asking how I took it, because she had made it for me once before and remembered. I thought about that. The second time I visited, he was in from the range before dark, which is a thing a man does when there is a reason to be in before dark, and she had dinner on when he came through the door, and he washed his hands and sat down and she put the food in front of him, and he said something to her quietly that I did not catch, and she said something back that I also did not catch, and neither of them was looking at me when they said it. It was the kind of ordinary that takes years to build, and that looks, from the outside, like it was always there. I have spent 23 years on the frontier. I know the difference between something that looks like it was always there and something that was built, carefully, from what remained after everything else was taken. What they had at Silo Flats was built, every inch of it. And every inch of it was worth the building.